So the recording should be on start. Beautiful. So a very warm welcome and good morning to those who are joining us in morning time. Good evening to those folks who are joining us from North America. I think we've got quite a few representing. It is so fabulous to have you with us. This is an encore presentation, if you like, of the celebratory launch party that we held with CMI a few weeks ago, which was in the evening time for Australia, which perhaps didn't suit our North American cohorts. Before I go too much further, we have had conversations all about the weather this morning because, you know, this is a time when we are going through much change with our weather and surprises with what happens from a weather perspective. And with that brings and draws our attention to the importance of country. And those of you who are familiar with Agile Change Leadership Institute, again, will know that we find that we can't talk about change and agility without recognising and paying our respects to the First Nations people of this country. So we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this workshop from three lands, Boon Wurrung, Gadigal and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We also would like to pay our respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you are joining us from. We pay our respects to elders past and present and their ongoing connections to the lands and water of this country. It is our most fervent hope that we can really work and collaborate with the Indigenous people to understand how we adapt to change with country in this land. Okay, so for those who are just joining us, a very warm welcome. You have full control over whether you want cameras on or cameras off. I will get you to make sure that you're on mute. We will have time for questions. What I would welcome you to do is if you've got questions coming up, then perhaps put them in the chat. Michelle and Lena will take note of those and see if there's anything that we can address in the moment. Otherwise, we're going to have time for that at the end. So for those of you who are new to us, we are the Agile Change Leadership Institute, partnering with Michelle Teunis of CollabWise. We formed in 2019. We now have the privilege of having impact in 78 countries, 148 organisations. We've now had some 2,450 students enrolled in our courses and our programs. Some of you will know us from our books. So Lena and I first started writing and publishing back in 2017. And you will see there that there's a list of books that we have published. I do note that we're 2024, and there seems to be a bit of a slowing down there. So that might be a watch this space. Who knows? Anyway, it is lovely to have you with us. We very much do consider that this is a party, right? Because we think there is a lot to celebrate when it comes to the consideration of brain-friendly change. And it's probably one of the freshest things that we've seen in the change space for quite some time. Today, what we're going to cover is we'll have a little bit of an introduction about what it's about. Lena's going to share the case for brain-friendly change. Michelle's going to talk about the brain behind change. We're then going to go through 5 common change practitioner pain points, have a little bit of a chat about your change context with relation to the brain, and then end on what it means to be a self-regulated change manager. And as I said, there will be time for further questions at the end of this session. If you've got questions, as I said, drop them in the chat. If we can't fit them in, what we'll do is we've got all your email addresses. We'll write up a blog post and send that out afterwards so that you've got access to that. Well, enough of the preamble. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself to the group so they know your role in this?
Yeah, good morning. Just wanted to do a quick sound check to make sure that you can hear me, Jen.
Certainly can.
Excellent. So hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Michelle Teunis. You might know me from my Brains on Change posts on LinkedIn, and I've had the absolute honour of co-authoring and presenting the Brain Friendly Change course with Jen and Lena at ACLI, which is absolutely fantastic. I see that I know quite a few of you on the call. If I look and sound a little bit different than usual today, my apologies in advance. My beautiful 3-year-old brought me a gift home, aka daycare germs. I'm sure many of you have been there, so please forgive me if I get a little bit sweaty. I'm an accredited change practitioner, agile coach, and specialist in applied organisational neuroscience. And I've worked in change leadership and capability for around the last 25 years now, so probably giving away my age there, for some of the most iconic brands in media, digital resources, education, and banking. If you can sort of name the type of change and transformation, I've probably worked on it in that time. I've also been lucky enough to set up and lead some amazing enterprise change teams. And most recently, I've worked on a global scale in the area of psychosocial risk. And those of you in Australia would know a little bit about that. I'm an avid lifelong learner. And for the purposes of this brain-friendly change course, I have around 7 qualifications in applied neuro and behavioural science for change, currently completing my master's in neuroscience and education, and have recently been awarded the Master Neuroplastician qualification through the Institute of Organisational Neuroscience, which recognises advanced application and expertise in applied neuroscience. So nice to meet you all here online today, if I haven't already.
Thanks, Michelle. Lena, and yourself.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everyone. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Some of you may know me. You've either worked with me or seen posts on LinkedIn or seen our books. And I've also seen some names up there on the screen. I think a couple of you may have even come to the joint book launch Jen and I had in 2017 when we both co-launched our first books in Melbourne, Australia. So it's great to see some of you back here again also. My background has come from learning and development. So I was in learning and development for a long time before heading into the land of change management, which is a typical segue, but we know that it's one of many, many roads that take people to change. So it's always fascinating to find out how people do get into change management. And that's what I think makes the profession and the work so rich with those diverse backgrounds and diverse ways of thinking. One of the things that I've been talking about for a long time in my work in change has been the neuroscience of change and brain science, because I've always been fascinated with what makes people tick, but particularly what makes them trip, like what gets in the way of people being the best version of themselves. So that's why preparing or getting involved in this course with both Michelle and Jen has been an amazing experience. I've learned along the way because I'm also a lifelong learner and have loved the process of creating the program and also sharing our learnings with other people, because it really does bolster your ability to get cut through in a time where I think we'll all agree is a time of unprecedented overwhelm and infobesity, we call it, and just ongoing change. It's just relentless. So it's a great time to be here and a great time to try and get that cut through and have you here with us today to find out more about it.
Fabulous. Thanks, Lena. So for those who I have not met, like Lena, I would describe myself as a lifelong learner. One of my favorite quotes is, as I teach, so do I learn. As I learn, so do I teach. And that really speaks to the reciprocal relationship of my role in the Agile Change Leadership Institute. So my background has been working in change since the early 90s. There was a break in that time where I went into academia and I did my PhD in organizational change and communication. I'm also a certified safe agilist. 2013 was kind of when I first really started to get my hands dirty in the space of neuroscience. And that came through some of the initial workshops with the Change Management Institute. And yes, you will find, and I'm going to send you an email after this, you'll find that both Lena and I, we did podcasts on this back in, I think, 2016. And now we've got a great podcast with Michelle and Lena, so I'm going to send you all those links. Like Lena, writing has been part of my world. And I think what appeals to me most about brain-friendly change is that I have a real interest in compassion and trauma in the workplace. And the concept of being able to design and deploy change in a brain-friendly way really speaks to me about how we can be as kind as possible to people's brains. So, that's one of my driving motivations for this. In a nutshell, why are we here? Well, on the 8th of August, we launched the Brain Friendly Change course, which is about applied neuroscience and change management. And 12 weeks later, we've now got 145 people enrolled across 18 countries, which was really exceeded our expectations. And part of it spoke to this, really rapid growth and interest in the area globally, speaks to the concept of, we're now in what we would call a zeitgeist. And a zeitgeist is the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history. And so within change context, this is a change zeitgeist, which is really looking at how do we really center humans in change. And I know sometimes that can sound a bit twee, that, haven't we always been doing change with humans? But I think all of us could say, actually, no. When we look back at some of the work we've done, it really hasn't centered on the humans. It's centered on the technology, or it's centered on the sponsor's needs. Whereas this is really, looking at how do we do change with the human brain in mind. And I think we need to stop and celebrate this, right? One of the things that is a concern to us in terms of the change industry is that we go, right? Whether it's from project to project or week to week or sprint to sprint, we don't often stop to celebrate what is happening on around us in terms of our profession and our industry. And so I really hope that this time that we're gathering is an opportunity for you to stop and think about how positive and exciting this is, that this is a defining moment of our time. For those who want to know what we're talking about with brain-friendly change, we would define it as the overlay of applied neuroscience, and the applied is important there. So it's distinct from clinical neuroscience with contemporary change management approaches and tools. So it's a type of change management that really prioritizes the brain's organizing principles in design, delivery, and leadership. Lena, would you like to talk us through the case for brain-friendly change?
Absolutely. So let's start with what the data is telling us and why brain-friendly change is really important. And there's 3 pieces of data that I'm going to share with you now, very recent data, that really supports the notion that we are in a state of a great deal of overwhelm and infobesity and unprecedented rates of change. And the first piece comes from Gartner only this year, that 77% of HR leaders are saying the employees are experiencing fatigue. We hear the term change fatigue a lot, and it's closely connected with overwhelm. So that is the first piece. The second piece of data from PwC is that people are saying that they've experienced more change at work in the last year than the 12 months prior. Now, my bet is when they do this survey again in 2025, they're going to say, well, 2025 was even more than 2024. So it's gaining momentum. It seems to be exponential growth in this intensity of change. And the third piece of data comes from the Neuro Leadership Institute, where there's been 183% increase in people saying there's more change than 5 years ago. And that's no surprise given what's been happening globally over the last 4 or 5 years. So we can see there the clear theme there was overwhelm, fatigue, volume of change, and rate of change. While all this is going on, at the bigger picture level, at a real macro level, there are other things going on with geopolitical issues and shifts and climate challenges, and even how we organise ourselves at work. And Jen and Michelle, or Michelle has mentioned psychosocial risks. So there's increased legislation too on how we need to organise ourselves at work. Only recently was the right to disconnect legislation, which I think is just Australia at the moment. I'm not sure if that's global, but it certainly has implications for how we work. There's hybrid working and, of course, the post-pandemic exhaustion and stress. And there's even a word for this burden of chronic stress. So if you haven't heard this term before, here's a good one to put away. It's called allostatic load. So there's a lot going on. There's also an increase in our workforce of people identifying as neurodivergent. And Jen will tap into this into a little more detail later on. And we also know that there's people in the workplace affected by multiple trauma. So you can see that there's a lot of things happening which are applying pressure on how we work that contribute to this sensation or experience of overwhelm and intensity of change. So we know brain-friendly change also brings 5 gifts. So let's have a look at those. So the first thing it does is helps us reduce resistance of change. If we discover more about how the brain operates and what really annoys the brain versus what really is pleasing or creates reward states for the brain, we know that we can work with resistance and start to identify it as a response. And then it's a response to change that we can work with from that brain science perspective. It also helps us build authority and influence. The more we know about brain-friendly change, the more we can advise leaders and talk about change as a response and how we can actually create activities and work with what the brain likes. So we've got change activities which are brain-friendly, which of course will lead to improved adoption. That means the change activities also going to feel more natural. So it's going to be less jarring. Of course, if we work with how our brain works naturally and how we're wired to operate, and Michelle's going to talk about some great operating principles with the brain really soon, so this will make more sense, then the more likely we are to deliver change in a more natural way that's going to cause less pain or angst or be less jarring for people. And this also means that the way we land change is going to be safer. If people are feeling more comfortable with the change and it's more aligned to how we think and how we're naturally wired, we are going to feel safer. And when you feel safer with change, you are naturally more productive and feeling a lot more comfortable. And we also know that our change will stick. If we are introducing change in a way that's going to improve adoption, because it's considering how we are wired to operate, we know our change effort's going to be more meaningful and it's going to hit the mark, it's going to gain momentum, and it's going to help build lasting habits. And this is something that is often overlooked when we introduce change activities. Okay, so how do we make it stick? How do we get that sticky bit at the end?
Fabulous. Michelle, would you like to talk us through the preferences?
Yeah, sure. So Lena has alluded to some of our inbuilt preferences or key organizing principles, as I say they are. So our brains have these built-in preferences, which is super important for us to know about when designing for change, because they actually impact how we perceive and respond to change. So they crave predictability and safety, with survival being the brain's number one priority. It's a part of our evolutionary wiring. It also prioritizes scanning the room for threat over reward. We do have a negativity bias. Our brains are wired for efficiency and energy conservation. And why wouldn't they? They're actually an expensive organ to run, taking up to 20% of our entire metabolic energy, even though they're only around 2% of our weight. This is one of the reasons why we sometimes stick with the status quo, even if we know that it's time for change. Our brains are also highly social organs that are wired to connect. So we look to our peers and leaders for cues and reassurance. If change feels unsupported, we're more likely to avoid it. Why? Because it makes us feel safer to not go against the tribe. I like to think of these key preferences like a built-in operating system that influence how we perceive and respond to change. And I categorize them into 4 key organizing principles that help us consider them practically when designing for change, because I think that's what we're really trying to do through the course, is give you practical tools rather than going, too deep into neuroscience so that you can't use it. So we have the...
Didn't get it to work on the laptop.
Sorry, I think someone needs to...
Yeah, I'm just muting. Yeah.
Awesome. The prediction machine, similar to AI, just more powerful. In fact, our brains actually predict more than it reacts. And it's constantly predicting the world around us based on things like past experiences. So it really is a prediction machine. Very important for us to know with change. To minimize threat and maximize reward, I'm sure a lot of you know that. the social connector, and the energy conservationist. And remember about the metabolic energy that it takes up. It really is an energy conservationist. That's why we really like habit and automaticity. There's another word for you. The great news is that you can design for change that resonates with these preferences, and we teach you how in the Brain Friendly Change course. All right. Welcome to the Biz and Baz party. You're probably thinking, what is that, Michelle? Now that you know a little bit more about our brain's preferences, you will start to get why presenting change based on logic alone probably won't be enough. So let's delve a little deeper into the science behind the organizing principle of minimize threat and maximize reward with the introduction of our mates, Biz and Baz. I'll tell you who they are, don't worry. Biz, or our behavioral inhibition system, is the cautious crew. It triggers an alert or threat-based response to change, referred to as avoidance. BAS, or our behavioral approach system, is like a go-getter gang. It drives reward-seeking and approach behaviours to change. And it's the interplay between these two systems that determines our overall behaviour. When BAS is more active, we're more likely to approach change. When BIS is more active, we're more likely to avoid and resist it. All right. So when it comes to designing for change and our mates Biz and Baz, I like to think of it as a seesaw with our mate Biz, or our inhibition system on one end, and Baz, or our approach system on the other. And our aim is to design for and create change experiences that are leaning towards Baz, our behavioural approach system. This helps in removing threat as a distraction and encourages people to approach rather than avoid change. All right. Yeah, okay, cool. I know where we are now, Jen. Sorry, I didn't see the other ones. So I'm going to take you through a glimpse into some of the many brain-based practical applications we go through in the course that align with those key organising principles that I spoke to you about. The first one is co-create. We've all heard of it before, but it is super, super important. Co-creation in a safe and collaborative space activates the neurotransmitters dopamine for reward and motivation. And it also teaches you what you might approach or avoid next time. And oxytocin, which encourages social connection. It also helps people feel safe through providing them with a sense of agency and control. And choice is evolutionarily powerful to our brain. Can't believe I got that out. As in history, to have choice meant both status, which is really important to us, and survival. 2, let people practice the new thing. Practice makes perfect. It's not just a cliche. And repetition is an essential ingredient to move information from our short to long-term memory, along with association importance. But it's more than just repetition. Our brains, as I mentioned before, are prediction machines that literally predict what might come next. When reality doesn't match expectations of what your prediction is, we can feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's called a reward prediction error. So practicing the new thing, whatever that might be, in a safe space helps us to adjust faster, learn better, and build confidence. And a sense of competence is a powerful psychological motivator, and that's from a neuroscience and a behavioral science point of view. 3, showcase for social proof. When you showcase progress and success, it creates a shared experience that reduces the perception of risk. Also, if we see others doing it, we want to be involved too, or even do better. It's part of our brain's social wiring to succeed in a group. 4, chunk change. Chunking enhances memory by organising information into meaningful units, reducing cognitive load, so our energy conservationist brain is more likely to pay attention and remember. The latest neuroscience says that 4-related and scaffolded chunks is the way to go. So I've got a little gift for you. If we just pop to the next slide. Now, that was a really quick explanation. And we go through a lot more in the course. We go through the 4 key organising principles and how to design for change with those in mind. But my gift to you today is a brain-friendly change manifesto that I created. Of course, that's a nod to Agile and the Agile Change Leadership Institute. But it takes you through 20 practices and ideas to meet the needs of our brain's preferences and 4 key organising principles. So it will help you kickstart designing for brain-friendly change today. And Jen will be, I understand, sending this to you after the presentation. So I hope you will enjoy.
Fabulous. Thanks, Michelle. So now we're going to cover off about 2 minutes on each of 5 core pain points that change practitioners normally have in their work. Lena, hit us up with leadership.
Yes, I think this was one of number one, or very, very close to number one pain point for change practitioners who said leaders don't listen, they don't understand us, they don't know what we do, they don't value us. So the key here is meet them where they're at. We very rarely work in positions where we have formal influence. So we have to work with the notion of informal influence. And this is where knowledge is powerful. And knowledge about neuroscience is going to be your weapon, if we want to call it that. So the idea here is speak their language and talk about what they're already familiar with. And what we know leaders love is conversations around productivity, metrics, and dollars. So once you start to speak that language and talk about things like if there's a productivity dip because people are adopting a new change and have to do something differently, that affects our bottom line because that means that productivity equates to dollars. This was a big game changer for me, particularly when I shifted my conversations to this. So when we have these conversations, we're going to have greater influence because we're connecting with information that's meaningful to them, and we're connecting with information which is about how they are measured in their own performance. This is their world. This is what defines them, and this is how they're rewarded. So we're actually playing to their reward center. So the way forward here is to present brain-friendly business cases to leaders and metrics that activate the dopamine through the progress principle. And the other one is that we know, as Michelle mentioned, dopamine is that neurochemical associated with reward. Now, when we talk about things that they're familiar with, we also tap into what's called the mere exposure effect or the familiarity bias. So we are really tapping into something that's psychologically sound in their brains. And when Jen and I, when we talk about metrics with leaders, we go visual. The first thing we do is we go visual because we know that there's overwhelm, and they are particularly overwhelmed with a great deal of information. So that's probably one of the first principles. And the second one is to work with that progress principle that I spoke about, because we know that the brain loves progress, and this is what gives people a dopamine hit. So with progress bars, like the difference between quarter one and quarter two, and they can see the progress, that really hits that sweet spot that they love about metrics and productivity and progress. And I've just got an example there of a very visual dashboard. Find out what metrics actually blow their hair back, what metrics really mean a lot to them, and then you can tailor your visual metrics and dashboards around that. So this is where you really start to meet them in the middle and start to have impact, I think, with your conversations with them.
I love that, Lena. Blow their hair back. I'm going to use that one. I think it's fantastic. Now,
if they have hair, Michelle.
If they have hair, exactly. Fantastic. All right. So resistance, let's celebrate it. Whether you use the term resistance or not, it really is a response to change. So resistance is just like a textbook saying, because there's so many things that can constitute to what resistance might mean. But neuroscience tells us to look at resistance a little differently as more of a, as Lena said, natural response to change. So let's celebrate these insights. Now, our brains are 100% wired for change throughout our entire life, thanks to neuroplasticity. But the honest truth is that for any brain over the age of 25, obviously that doesn't account to me, of course it does, change requires more effort. We don't create new neurons anymore the way you think we might. We only connect and strengthen current ones. So our energy conservationist brain also prefers the reflexiveness, so like automation and automation of habit. And change is deliberate. It's not really automated, is it? So you can see why it requires effort. Hence why it can make our brains feel a little bit uncomfortable. So whether you want to call that resistance or not, but this is from a neuroscience perspective. This, as well as the fact that our brain does have that negativity bias, it scans the room for threat over reward, means that the brain's natural response to change is similar to stopping at an amber traffic light and checking for what the next signal is before it either stays put or proceeds. So in the Brain Friendly Change course, I take you through 6 common amber lights, what they are, why they exist, and how you can design for change to turn those amber lights to green. So here's a green light to try. So we'll start with one of the key amber lights. I call it the ROI trap. So our brains are like savvy investors. They really are. They're energy conservationists. And they calculate a perceived ROI on change. So if the effort feels high and the relevance and reward is unclear, people will likely hit decline, particularly in such a cognitively overloaded world. So some green light interventions for what I call a positive ROI is to provide clarity. So connect change to purpose, explain how it aligns to relevant outcomes that the people you're talking to care about. The next one is around creating effortless efficiency. So streamline the change process, make it visual, but also relatable and simple. Drop the jargon, keep it co-created and chunked into manageable steps, and show progress. And this is just, going on the back of what Lena said. Our brains absolutely crave progress and prefer to feel achievement now rather than later. It's something called delay discounting. So celebrating small wins and progress along the way ensures that people don't fall into what I call a temporal gap, which is a gap between effort and reward where procrastination might live.
This is me.
Yes.
Hey.
Over to another one of pain points that we hear, and I alluded to this when I spoke about speaking the leader's language, and that is the ability to influence without formal authority. So what can we tap into to help us do that? And one of the things that we can really leverage is what nudge theory teaches us. And nudge theory is about the art and science of subtle interventions to influence behaviour without limiting choice. Now, Michelle mentioned autonomy. So this is a very important element of nudge theory, is that we often can still offer choice so people feel like they have a sense of control and they can make a decision and they have some control over the environment. The other thing that neuroscience teaches us with nudge theory is that people love tapping into the wisdom of the crowd. Michelle mentioned this as well. We like to do what other people are doing, and we like social connection because social connection means social proof. So we apply those nudging techniques to help people take action, leveraging those two aspects. So let's have a look at some brain-friendly change actions that link to that. And the first one links to autonomy, which is choice architecture, giving people choice in doing things. So as change practitioners, we can offer choice in what training dates or sessions can people come to. Do they want to be a change champion or do they want to nominate a change champion? If you start to dive into what we do day by day, we can start to see that there are a lot of choices in there. So to leverage nudge theory, highlight those choices and make those choices highly visible to people, because that really gives them a sense of control that they love, and we can tap into that. The second one is social proof. So use statistics and data to give social proof, to lend that real credibility to what you're saying. So, for example, if you're looking at setting up a change management office, you could use social proof to use a statistic or a line like, did you know that organisations that dedicate resources for a change centre of excellence have increased adoption and benefits realisation by 78%. There's a lot of data out there you can use to really start to build your case for change and build your case for what you're doing. So you're actually leveraging that aspect of social proof that people love.
All right. So cut through comms. I think that's something super, super important in our sort of, again, cognitively overloaded and saturated attention economy, as I call it. So let's celebrate the knowledge of how to cut through with communications based on the neuroscience of communication. I actually have within the course and as a download, a detailed neurocomms guide as well. Now, our short-term memory has a limited capacity before it gets cognitively overloaded. And obviously, this has a lot to do with communication. In fact, our mental scratch pad as I call it, only holds things for around 20 to 30 seconds. Yet with change, we require focus and attention density, and for things to move from our mental scratch pad to our longer term memory, which is where we actually get that retention and the ROI on learning when it comes to change. And it's not easy to cut through with comms, given the epidemic of infobesity at work. So we really need to look at creating shared meanings and ensuring that communication goes beyond words on a page, because words on a page can actually be quite irritating to our nervous system because we apply different meanings to them. So going beyond words on a page into more active communication in how we communicate, so an engagement and connection as well. And brain-friendly change has some secret sauce to help you cut through. So here are some good, great, and excellent ideas in relation to how you can cut through with communication. Number one is get visual. Interesting and relatable visuals are actually processed 6 to 60 times faster than words alone. Now, we all know that dot point facts and figures are sometimes needed, though our energy conservationist brain is not a fan. So use them in context rather than being part of the norm. Even better, short videos or anything that's sort of on screen where people can see people interacting. It taps into dual coding theory, where our brain prefers a mix of interesting visual and verbal cues together. We simply engage better and learn faster through multi-sensory experiences. Even better again, get social. I'm sure you all know the power of social learning, and then social connection is one of our brain's key organizing principles. So this means allowing for multi-way interaction and communications. And it doesn't mean that you need to have people in the room. Obviously, that's preferred from a brain synchrony point of view. But the use of enterprise social networks is great for this. So anything like Facebook for Business, because people can ask questions, react, and interact. And that's sort of what's important. It mimics that face-to-face social interaction. And with your short videos, you can also supercharge them. This is a little trick from neuroscience by using interview-style formats. Sounds a bit strange, but neuroscience research shows us that even if we see 2 or more people interacting on screen through a video, it ups our attention density, similar to if we were live and in a personal social learning experience. Now, I think that's cut through in a pretty practical way.
Thanks, Michelle. You mentioned social and peer-to-peer learning. That's one of my favorites. Like sometimes I call that champagne learning on a beer budget, because you can learn so much from your peers. It's been so powerful. But anyway, let me get on to another pain point. And one is, how do we change habits? How do we really make the change stick? And you might remember what Michelle mentioned earlier about our brain being an energy conserving organ. And that means changing habits isn't really that easy. It means it needs more cognitive effort and more neural energy. So we also explore in the course a lot more about habit hacking and how we actually get to the core of habits. We also look at learning design, so designing learning in a way that's really natural for the brain, and that's also leveraging often the power of peer-to-peer learning and learning together as a team, as well as many, many different learning approaches, and the environment and aligning the environment. But let's take a closer look at habit hacking, because this is the one that gets a lot of people and people love finding out more about. So there's this thing called the habit loop, which I've learned, thank you, from Michelle, and that is that the loop is in 3 parts. So let me walk through that with you. The first part of the habit loop is the cue or the trigger, which prompts the call to action. And I'll explain an example in a moment. The second part is how we need to reframe that cue or that trigger, so that triggers then the new response to a change. And then the third and really important element is the reward, so the feedback. So what are you going to do to reinforce those new behaviours? So the example I'm going to use here is the CMO practice lead wants to find out what their team members' day looks like, because they're doing some work on capability profiling and what capabilities they need to build in their capability matrix. So they want a weekly report on what they're doing, and what's happening with the weekly report is some are doing it every now and again, and some are not doing it at all. So the CMO lead introduces the trigger. The trigger or the cue, which has been reframed, is the pop-up calendar reminder every Friday morning and a second reminder towards the end of the day. But that's still not enough. The third part, which is the reward element, which is often overlooked when we introduce change, often the performance systems are not realigned, is to have that built in to team members' KPIs, is responding to for example, reports in a timely manner or producing reports. And the really big tip here is to flag this in your change plans, that there is the habit loop, that we're going to explore the habit loop and leverage that in our change plans. And we have flagged it because we know that we need these things in place to help make the change stick. So this is where you're really starting to, I think, bolster your value and influence also as a change practitioner by leveraging those.
Fabulous, Lena. Thank you. So as we come closer to the end of this, I think want to flag there's 3 more things to celebrate. So first of all, we have more information now about our change audience that we didn't have, if I think about 2 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, that pertains to how brains operate. Second is that there is an inherent alignment, a beautiful synchronicity between a couple of the more contemporary change approaches with brain-friendly change. And so we'll just cover those off now. So I mentioned that we know a lot more about brains today than we have in the past years. The first is we know so much more now about the percentage of the workforce who identify as neurodivergent. The numbers on this are staggering when you look at them. So we're talking about a 787% increase in diagnosis of autism over 20 years. Over the same period of time, we've had a 68% increase in ADHD diagnosis. ADHD has nearly doubled in women over the last 2 years. And the bottom line is that means that you have a significant population in your workforce whose brains operate in a different way to perhaps the majority of the workforce, right? And so you need to be very savvy and thoughtful about how your change will be interpreted by that audience, but also how do you play to those strengths in your organization. Alongside that, we now have 70% of the workforce have experienced one traumatic event. 25 to 30% of the workforce have exposure to multiple traumatic events. We know that brains that have experienced trauma, in particular multiple trauma, do not process information. They don't lay down memories in the same way that brains that have not experienced trauma. Once you're looking at that level of percentage of your workforce, again, you have to think about what is the most kind way that we can implement change to the brains of our organization. I talked about the synchronicity or the alignment. One of the things that is closest to our heart is agile change. And we have said for ages that agile change is inherently brain friendly because of the continuous engagement, right, really plays to those brain's preferences of social proof and, a collaborative environment. Our visual and transparent communication makes it really easy for the brain to predict things. It gives it a level of safety because of the recognition of what's happening. Our data-informed decision-making, again, reduces the threat of change because people feel more confident with the information that they're getting. So there is a whole raft of really beautiful alignment between the 4 operating principles that Michelle spoke about, our preferences, and with our agile change capabilities, which then lead to what are the change practices that we do that support brain-friendly and agile ways of working. Lena, there's also lovely synchronicity with human-centered change, right?
Absolutely. It is so brain friendly. And when we look at brain friendly change, agile or agility, and we look at human-centered change, there's so many lovely overlaps. So I may start to talk about things here that are going to sound familiar because we've talked about them already in the last 45 minutes or so. But that's because that's the way it is. They do naturally overlap. So I'd like to explore now 3 ways that practices from this discipline really provide us with these human-centered benefits and get people to think differently and also get us to think differently about change. And the first one is that human-centered change and human-centered change approaches and tools nudge us to define the problem up front. Now, a lot of us have gone through that phase in leadership and management where we would have a leader who would say to us, don't come to me with problems, come to me with a solution, right? Well, this is very counter to that and very counter to the way we've probably been rewarded and conditioned to behave in the workplace in the past. We actually jump into solutions because we've been rewarded for it. And when we start to look at tools such as a journey map, we realize that we can really unpack what the pain points are and looking at what the real problem is. And sometimes we find there's other problems there, or it's actually not even the problem we're trying to solve. But the other thing that these tools also do is they remind us to park our expert mindset. Another thing that we've been rewarded for in the past. We're an expert in our field. A lot of people feel guilty for not knowing something and feeling like they've got to find out something that they don't know. But human-centered change does this with tools in such a beautiful way that we don't have to say we don't know. We can just say we just would like to find out more about your point of view, and you can frame it in a way that's very safe for yourself and very safe for the people sharing their experiences and pain points. And the other thing is it actually brings empathy to the forefront. Now, there's a lot of research that has shown that empathy doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And when we're in a state of overwhelm, that gets in the way of us also having empathy. So when we have a tool, for example, like an empathy map or a persona, or particularly a journey map where we invite people to talk about what they're thinking and how they're feeling, that helps us be empathetic leaders or empathetic change managers, even if it doesn't come naturally to us, because we've got the tools that promote empathy and make people feel valued. And we really are heading into human-centered change territory when we can leverage those tools and speak that language with them and park what we think we know, because we don't know everything.
Michelle,
Excellent.
bring us home.
So you're worth celebrating too. And this is really important because we don't have an easy job, and we also become cognitively overloaded, and we're supporting people through change who are cognitively overloaded. So we really do need to fill our own cup, because when we don't, it impacts us, our well-being, and our ability to facilitate change effectively. And if we're not at our best, it can create a negative emotional contagion. Yep. Emotions are as catchy as the flu I caught from my 3-year-old, resulting in others getting defensive, impacting trust, and the change itself can actually get bogged down. So, put simply, the ability to navigate change starts with self-navigation. Now, our brain has 2 gears, and you can't be in both at the same time. This is really important to understand. One's called the task positive network, which is self-explanatory. And the other is called the default mode network, or DMN for short. And it's our active rest state, still very active, but it's where we can recharge and self-regulate. It's where we mind wander. So a great tip to help shift gears intentionally into DMM, or the default mode network, is to actually take short breaks, 10-minute breaks, and mind wander. On Brains on Change, I did a whole post around with some research around the issues with back-to-back meetings. So I go a little bit into it there. But when you do take breaks, ensure to stroll, so walk, and don't scroll. You might think that scrolling on digital devices is relaxing, because sometimes we have a placebo to feel that it does, though it's actually the opposite. And it adds sort of that stress and then cognitive overload. I've created a specific module in this course called the Self-Regulated Change Manager, and it takes you deep into the latest neuroscience of self-regulation with tips and practical application, including what emotions really are, based on the latest neuroscience with Dr. Lisa Feldman-Barrett, the power of making decisions in draft, the importance of brain-body balance, and broadening and building your emotional toolkit. Plus, I've also designed my own STOP model of self-regulation that you can practice straight away. And the practice of self-regulation is really important, as it's a form of self-directed neuroplasticity, or changing your brain for the better. And I think just one more thing that I'd like to add here, Jen, is that people who work in change, leadership and learning, we are actually brain changers, because we do work with people in relation to synaptic plasticity, where they're creating and strengthening new connections in the brain. So I think it's pretty special. So I'd just like to end on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for persevering through that lurgy. Folks, we've come to the end of this. Now, some of you may be super, super keen to jump on the brain-friendly course after we've done this. Please don't. Here's the reason why. I'm going to send you an email in the next day. Let's give myself some kindness. But sometime over the next day, I'm going to send you an email, and I'm going to send you a coupon, which will give you a little celebratory gift to help you with the purchase of that course. I'm also going to send you Michelle's fabulous brain-friendly preferences manifesto with that. So that's coming up. But let me check in right now with the little time we've got left. Questions, comments, thoughts. Let's have a look at what's happening.
And just for the record, Jen, nothing has popped up.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I did lose my comments for some reason during that, but feel free to hit me up if you've got questions. But thanks, Trish. Yes. And stroll, don't scroll. Yes, that should definitely be a new 2025 mantra for me as well. So
Awesome, Vanessa. Wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I actually have a question. I mean, I think I can come to a conclusion, but I'm just curious what either the three of you all or others on the call would classify as trauma. I mean, how big does it need to be? Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I don't need to know that answer.
Yeah. So we do cover some of the definitions in the course about trauma.
Yep.
Yeah. So there are specific definitions around what makes for a traumatic event. It's an event where you have no control over. It's an event where you have concern for your safety. And it's an event where you have no understanding of when it will end. Which, when you take those three criteria, kind of looks like continuous change in the workforce, right? And I think, there are various types of trauma. And so it's not to say that all trauma is inherently problematic with respect to change in the organisation, because it depends on your ability to deal with that trauma. But if your capacity is exceeded, then it becomes challenging for your brain to understand change in a way that is not threatening. All change will be seen as a threat to safety.
Yeah. And I think if I could just add really quickly, obviously, as change leaders, unless we are clinical therapists, we're not therapists, and we never know what's going on for people in the work place. And we do have a perceptual asymmetry. So how we introspect, how we think of how others might be feeling is very different to how they are. So I think that when it comes to trauma-informed change, I think that's something that's going to get bigger in what we do as well, to assume that we should be practicing trauma-informed change just as a general sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. Robin, you're going to use cut-through comms. Beautiful. Thank you for the lovely words, Stephen. Amy, of course we're worth celebrating.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. Again, if you've got a question, come off mute. Jump in and join us. There. Everybody's deeply contemplated at this point. Or this is why we normally don't record our webinars, because we do find that when we record, people get shy with questions. So Tonya, big ups for the bravery there.
Yes. No, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Oh, Kelly, I just saw your message. Hello.
Thank you. All right. Well, if there are no questions, other questions coming up, we are at the end of the year, which has been inherently challenging for many people. So on behalf of the three of us, we're going to wish all of you the most restorative possible time you can have in the weeks ahead. Michelle tells us that the brain needs rest to thrive. And so this really is the opportunity to rest in whatever way makes sense for you. But if you do have any questions, then please either hit us up on LinkedIn. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, you're welcome to connect with us. when I send the email out, send us back any questions. We'll distribute it to each other and come back to you. But it has been a joy to share this celebration. Thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you well over the coming weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Likewise.
Let me stop recording. Got to work out how to do that.
Uh-huh.